Hey folks, thanks for joining us. My name is Aditya Badramraju. I'm from SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine team, and we are here to talk about configuring for price performance. Mo, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Mohammed Kabiruddin. I'm part of the same team on where we build products and services for SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine. And I'm here with Aditya today to talk about price performance. So let's get started.
So I'm so excited to be here, Mo. Frankly, the reason is me and Pam kind of did the same session last DPS, and most of the DPS veterans who are here, they might be knowing that we spoke about the same thing, but I'm sure you have few new surprises here for the team.
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's watch what are those, right? So one of the question is
where do we start? Like you said, you've delivered the session last year.
Yeah.
Where you spoke about basics, fundamentals.
Right.
I think by now customers understand, some of them at least understand what SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines are.
Yeah.
But for someone who's new to this area, who's maybe a DBA and SQL Server on premises, who wants to run Azure Virtual Machines, where do they start? There's so many options out there.
Yeah, and let's take a step back here, right? So, where does people how does people really come to cloud? That journey is kind of both. It really requires a good education, and it really requires it's not so smooth. And you have so many options out there. When it comes to Azure, you have so many options out there, and a customer really needs to go and do their workload optimization. They really need to understand their workload, take their workload, use appropriate tools to see, hey, I have X amount of transactions, Y amount of throughput. What is the best suited VM for me? There are so many permutations and combinations here, and I agree with all of them. And for me, one of the best way of doing it is, first of all, understanding what is the infrastructure out there, and also what is the workload that I have. If I know these two very well, I'm sure everyone can configure the best price per Azure Virtual Machine.
Right.
Let's go dig into the Azure infrastructure as a whole, right? So there are so many compute options, right? You know this. Like, we talk to customers in and out, and there are so many questions like, hey, we see a lot of VMs, and what are those VMs that are exactly suitable for SQL Server for the best price perf? There are, if you see, if you go to next to go, you see there are two things that I rounded up. One is that, and another is the general purpose. So why I essentially rounded up these two is the general purpose are the basic SQL Server workloads where I have a small reporting machine or a very small workload. I want to just get started with a 4-core machine. That's where
these are good for trials.
Yes.
Okay.
Those are those. And if you are into the serious mission of running the enterprise workloads and your production workloads, I would really choose the memory optimized ones. And there are a bunch of them there too. And if you want me to really cherry pick, or like two of those, I would say EDS v5, and you would have heard us talking again and again about EBDS v5. I think you would talk about that in your slides a lot. But EDS v5 and EBDS v5 are the most preferred and the product group recommended VM series for running SQL Server workloads on Azure Virtual Machines.
Right.
We do, and if you go to that link, aka.ms./SQLasperf, we kind of explain why and how those really are the best virtual machines that you have.
Right.
Yeah. So coming to those are those double sprinkles.
Sure.
So the other question I was being asked, and we are being asked a lot of times, is there is one thing is for sure out there is, like, you can't get a perfect size always. Sometimes my throughput requirements are higher than my CPU requirements. and that's natural for SQL Server. SQL
Yeah.
Server requires a lot of memory, it requires a lot of throughput for all the enterprise
Right.
workloads than the CPUs that is required.
Yeah.
And SQL Server being an enterprise product, the license costs are also high. So to really help customers pay their optimized license cost, we also have a version called constraint code CPU VMs. If you go to the link that is there out there in the docs, you will see this page where we have constraint code CPUs. The technique around here is if you take that M3216MS, if you click on that, there is that 16, right?
Mm-hmm.
That 16, if you see 32-16,
Right.
that means it's a constraint core VM.
Sure.
You have a 32 core machine power,
Yeah.
but you are only paying licenses for the 16
Right.
cores. 16 cores because that is the constraint core
Right.
virtual CPU.
So this is when you need the throughput and IOPS of a 32-core machine.
Yes.
In that series, but
Mhm.
then you only want to pay for licenses for 16 cores.
Yep.
That's when you need to go for this.
Yes,
Okay.
you got it. Now let's say that okay, I have configured my VMs right, and I have made sure I have check marked by understanding all the VM sizes. I took the VM size that we recommend, like EBDS V5,
Right.
and now what? What is the next step? The biggest next step is understanding how you can provide disks for the virtual
Right.
machine. So this is where I have seen most of the customers getting wrong, right? And I know there are few announcements for you in this space for yourselves also, but
So before we dive into this, do customers get any help from us or from the portal or from the experience to guide them through understanding and provisioning this disks?
that's a great question, Mo. Marketplace images by themselves, if you go provision your SQL Server using marketplace image,
Right.
The biggest thing that you can do is get all the best practices that we recommended
Right.
through that marketplace image.
Okay, got it.
Which also includes the storage.
Awesome.
How you should configure storage, what type of
Right.
storage pool you need to use.
Okay.
All that is embedded into that provisioning experience.
Right.
Now coming to this basics, right? If you go to a VM disk provisioning, as in if you want to understand what all different type of disks are there and what is the, for a particular VM, what is that max cache and what is that is there, like how to really see it. The best way of doing it is go to that VM and there are these columns. Let me explain all those columns for
Sure.
you, right? There is temp storage. That temp storage essentially means the VM has a temporary storage attached to it, and that is 300 GB in that particular case. And there is max data disk, as in you can attach a max of 16 data disks apart from the temp storage
Right.
for that VM. And there is max cached and temp storage throughput and maxed uncached throughput. So you should really be looking at this very keenly, right? When you say maxed cached and temp storage throughput, that means the throughput that you get out of that D drive attached to it.
Right.
Whereas max uncached is the remote storage,
Right.
which is that later 16 data disk that you have.
Got it.
So what we recommend is, if you go to next slide, configure all your transaction log files onto the uncached data disk. Because log files doesn't require any
Right.
caches,
Yeah.
right? And there your host caching should be none.
Right.
Whereas coming to data disk, which is this is where you will have host caching equal to read only, where the some of the throughput comes from that max cached throughput.
Yeah.
Where that's the pure advantage of Azure, right? This is all Azure working
Right.
for you.
Yeah.
So where you can get more throughput, more IOPS out of it. Configure all your data disks like your P30s, your P40s,
Yeah.
using host caching equal to read only. The next thing that you need to do is you need to keep your TempDB in that local drive. And this TempDB will not have any caching attached to
Right.
it. So the local drive itself is pretty fast, and why we have TempDB in the local drive? That the basic reason is it's an ephemeral disk, which essentially means whenever VM gets restarted, what we do is we will move that VM from one host to another host. Because we move from one host to another host, we don't, and this actual data disk is attached to host,
Right.
not to the VM.
Right.
And hence, because we move there, VM doesn't know what is there in that disk.
Yeah.
And hence, when we move out to the another host, it is again a fresh disk for you.
Right.
And the only database that will be created with every restart is no prizes for the guess as it is TempDB, which that's the reason why we ask you to keep your TempDB
Got it.
in the D drive. So these are the minimal things that you really need to know,
Right.
when you have to configure SQL Server on Azure virtual machines.
Right.
And one of the things that I would want to tell folks out here is, please optimize, understand your workload, and look at the options that we have mentioned just now. Use EBDS v5,
Right.
to configure your storage properly, and I guess that's the best way to do it.
So in
Now-
this diagram, you've separated out the data and the log files in two separate disks or two separate sections. Is that a recommended approach?
Yeah,
Okay.
as of now, yes.
Okay.
And I think let's turn the tables around,
Sure.
right? Now you tell me what you have and what you're working recently, and what are the best ways, other surprises that you have in the store for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm super excited to talk about this because we know SQL Server runs best on Azure, both from a performance standpoint and from a pricing standpoint. And for that reason, when you spoke about the EBDS machines, you spoke about how you configure this. It's also important to understand that when you look at managed disk or when you look at remote storage, there are multiple options, right? So what you see here on the screen is basically the options you have on the disk side or the remote storage side.
Okay.
You've got three different types of disks. You've got premium disk, you've got premium SSD V2, which is very new, which we just announced. They're in preview at the moment.
Okay.
And we have ultra disk. We also have standard HDDs and SSDs, but we don't recommend those for SQL Server workloads. SQL Server is hungry on IOPS throughput, and it needs certain characteristics of certain storage elements, and these disks offer the best price per for SQL Server workloads.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm more interested in that public offering that you just.
Yeah, I'm going to go deep into that specifically.
Oh,
so when you and Pam came to the show last year and spoke about price performance, we did not have premium SSD V2s.
Oh yeah.
Customers had to either choose from premium SSD, which was well suited for IO intensive workloads, or go to ultra disk, which was best suited for extremely high IO intensive workloads.
Correct.
There's nothing in between.
Right.
And the price difference between these two was significant. So you either go pay for premium SSD or you go super high on ultra disk, right?
Right.
So customers have asked for something in between where it performs well and also is cost effective.
Right.
And that's where we announced premium SSD V2s,
Okay.
which caters to such high transactional analytical IO intensive workloads.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, so you got these three options, but equally important to understand is there are certain series of VMs that have extra enhancements that work well for SQL Server specifically.
Okay.
One such example is M series. M series has something called write acceleration.
Correct.
And this is good for workloads that have log specific requirements.
Correct.
Where there could be write log weights that are hanging on the disk and that needs a write acceleration to get that extra IOPS you need.
Right.
So for those reasons, M series has this feature enabled which has write acceleration which will give you that benefit.
Correct.
So again, if you have that log specific workloads, log intensive workloads that require high log throughputs, you could choose M series.
Right.
In terms of disks themselves, we feel that the best suited disks for SQL Server data workloads for data disks are P30 and P40s.
Correct.
And the reason for that is we have caching enabled on those. They work well with the series of VMs that you just spoke about, and those are best suited for our workloads. And most of our SQL customers use P30s and P40s. Right. You can mix and match. For log, you can choose, because they don't require caching, you can choose anywhere from any of the PCs disks. Now, again, you spoke about how does a customer get guidance on configuring these storage options. Choose the marketplace image, choose the Azure portal provisioning experience to get all of these, where we've built in the best practices. We will tell you that you need to configure a separate data disk, a separate log disk, turn on things like network acceleration by default. All that is baked into the experience. So customers don't have to go and search and read documentation. It guides them through this experience, right? So that's where we start. Now, I'm super happy to announce the new enhancements we've done on the disk, right? So if you look at the screen here, we had premium SSDs, we had ultra disks. And the thing in between is the sparkles with premium SSD v2. Pam loves using the word sprinkles. I'm matching them up with sparkles with premium SSD v2s.
Okay.
So the benefit you get with premium SSD v2 is it's suited for high intensive IOPS and throughput workloads.
Okay, interesting.
And what that means is, previously with premium SSD v2s, you could only get 20,000 IOPS per disk.
You mean premium SSD v1?
Sorry, premium SSD v1s.
Yep.
That stuck to my brain, premium SSD v2s. You could only get 20,000 IOPS per disk.
Correct.
Now with premium SSD v2s, you could get 80,000 IOPS per disk.
Okay.
Which is like 4x the IOPS per disk.
That's huge.
So that significantly reduces the number of disks you might need for your workload.
That could be entire VM throughput, isn't it?
You could just configure a single VM with a single PV2 disk for your SQL Server production workload.
Oh, now that is interesting.
Yes, and that's why it significantly reduces your cost.
Okay.
Moreover, it also provides you a throughput higher than premium SSD v1s.
Okay.
So now you can go 1200 Mbps throughput compared to 900 before.
Okay.
Right, which is on par with some of our really high throughput intensive SQL workloads that we need.
Okay.
So if a customer needs, let's say 3600 Mbps, they could now achieve the same with like 3 PV2 disks.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And the best part about having premium SSD v2s in the market is now customers can granularly scale storage capacity, IOPS, and throughput independently, similar to what UltraDisk offered. So you're getting the benefits of UltraDisk for the price of premium SSD v2.
Now that's a steal, dude.
Yes. So imagine before, to get 80,000 IOPS, you would have had to provision 4 premium SSDs. Right? But you only probably needed 2 terabytes of disk space. Right? And you probably had to do 4 P30s, which would give you a lot more terabytes than you actually need for your workload. Now with premium SSD v2s, you can do all of that with a single disk. Right, so imagine the storage configuration simplified, performant, and cost effective for you.
So this blew my mind. Tell me this. So what you're telling me is I can have a terabyte of disk.
Yes.
And I can configure how many IOPS and how much throughput.
Up to 80,000 per disk, yeah.
Wow.
So you can have a database as small as, let's say, 1 terabyte and have like 160,000 IOPS with 2 disks if you need. 500 gigs on each disk as storage capacity, and you get your benefits.
Wow.
Right.
And are there any other benefits for using premium SSD v2?
Well, the main benefit is all the performance enhancements that it comes with, and granularly controlling each of these. But my favorite is you don't need to reconfigure storage if you need to change anything. Like tomorrow you decide your workload needs, today you've configured your disk with 40,000 IOPS. Tomorrow, let's say you need to go 60,000 IOPS. You don't need to do the reconfiguration of your storage pools.
So just push this
slider. You just use the slider in the experience to change from 40,000 to 60,000 IOPS, and instantly you get that.
Now I know why those are sparkles.
Yes. So sprinkles and sparkles. That's what Azure SQL VMs are all about.
Wow. Awesome.
So just to reiterate what premium SSD v2s provide. On a single disk, you get up to 64 TB bytes / terabytes. You get 80,000 IOPS per disk, and you get 1200 Mbps per throughput per disk.
Awesome.
And the best part of it all is the first 3000 IOPS on every disk is free. And the first 125 Mbps throughput on every disk is free.
Now that is
Yes.
a big differentiator for with any other.
So if you configure, let's say you need 10,000 IOPS
Right.
and you use 2 disks,
Right.
5,000 IOPS on each, you're literally paying for only 4,000 IOPS because the 6,000 IOPS are free. 3,000 IOPS on each disk are free.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's a significant cost saving again.
Okay.
Right? Again, premium SSD V2s provide the same millisecond latency, sub-millisecond latency that ultra disks are bound to provide.
Okay, what if I have a disk and I just want 3000 IOPS and I configure premium SSD V2?
You don't pay for any IOPS at all. You just pay for your storage capacity. So you get free IOPS and free throughput if you have smaller workloads.
Wow, that is really good.
Correct. And
Really
that's
good.
why it really sparkles out
Really good.
the power of
I
premium
can
SSD.
I can imagine big enterprise workloads, how they can really get facilitated out
Your
of this.
cost economics of configuring this will significantly change now.
Yeah.
Like DBAs, system administrators can now really use the power of these disks and use their mathematical financial calculations
Right.
to get the benefits that they need.
Right, because it is not only for the enterprise, it's also for the SMEs where they just can say, okay, I still want a premium SSD V2,
Right.
but I might configure only for the 4000 IOPS because
Yes.
my workload is that much.
Correct.
And I only pay for that extra 1000 IOPS.
Exactly. Right.
Wow. And the other good part I can imagine is I can tune these IOPS only during my peak workload season, like say December shopping season.
And then
I
tune
can
them
just
back
do-
down.
and tune that and tune that back off.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
this is all online.
Absolutely.
Wow. This is really great, Mo. I have a question. Can you see the performance difference between SSD V1 and SSD V2?
Sure. So we, if for folks who are following the space, we did a GigaOM benchmarking report on premium SSDs.
Right.
And what you see here is the blue bar is what GigaOM benchmarking did.
Okay.
So they weighed performance against AWS and
Okay.
came up with the equivalent configuration in Azure and compared the performance.
Okay.
We took the same benchmarking result and we calculated what if we were to swap that with premium SSD V2. What is the price difference we would get? If all the environment and variables, factors, everything remained the same,
Right.
and we just swap the disks out for premium SSD V2s, what is the comparison? And what you see on the screen is your price per query has significantly reduced with premium SSD V2s.
Wow.
So what I have shown on the screen is an example of an analytics workload. If you use premium SSD in Azure versus premium SSD V2, you're seeing a significant difference in price per query. This is price per query. And if you bundle it all together with your total storage cost, whether it's per month, per year, or over a 3-year period, that's a significant reduction. And you could go up to 50% price reduction just on storage by changing it to premium SSD V2s.
Wow.
Right? And that's where the real price performance benefits of SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines with the right SKU of EBDS V5 series VMs with premium SSD V2s, we believe, will be the perfect mix for customers to run their workloads.
Great. More like this itself really tells me how much of engineering effort is went in here.
Yeah.
And this is great.
Yeah, and we are constantly testing these performance characteristics to give guidance to customers.
Okay.
And if something changes along the way,
Okay.
we'll keep everyone posted. We'll publish more articles and blogs talking about it.
Okay. Makes sense.
So I did want to touch upon the recommended VM series. I know you spoke about your EBDS and EDS series, V5 series VMs, but we really believe that you get the highest remote throughput from EBDS V5 series VMs, right?
Okay.
That offers the best in-class price performance for SQL Server workloads.
Right. And the other reason could be this is one of the series which you can take it blindly because it has that temporary storage that we are talking about. It has all those
Absolutely.
all those throughput advantages that
Yep.
a SQL Server needs,
Correct.
and everything. And it is tailor made for SQL Server,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, let's not discount, like, you might have some really mission critical memory intensive SQL Server workloads,
Okay.
for which we believe the highest IO throughput and memory intensive workloads are best suited for M series,
Okay.
right? Now, M series are great for really large scale mission critical OLTP and high end data warehousing workloads.
So if let me understand it right, if because it might confuse customers
Sure.
too. We are saying that is best and this is best for both mission critical. What we are essentially talking about here is EBDS v5 has a limit till where you can go.
Yeah.
And it's 512 GB, I guess, is the max. And the next place where you want to land, if your memory requirements are very, very high, that ought to be M series. That's what you're talking
Yes,
about.
if you need terabytes of memory, that's where you go to M series. And again, EBDS v5 series are the most recommended for SQL Server workloads, only till you hit that ceiling of memory intensive workloads.
Okay, makes sense.
If you have memory intensive workloads, not only for SQL Server, but even there are other memory intensive applications like SAP HANA, M series was designed specifically for those workloads.
Makes sense. And,
Right?
and
And it
the-
is expensive.
Yeah.
Not to discount, it is expensive because you're requiring that amount of memory.
Makes sense. And I know the memory to core ratio of EBDS v5 is 1:8.
Correct.
Whereas the memory to core ratio for M series is 1:30 or
Yes.
1:21 or something like
Correct.
that.
Exactly.
1:30, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot that part.
Yeah, it's 1:30.
Okay, restart. So the last thing I also want to talk about with SQL VM series, again, you mentioned this before in your discussion. For dev test workloads, for smaller scale VMs, for smaller scale workloads on SQL Server, customers shouldn't be spending a lot of money on M series or E series, right?
Okay.
That's why we recommend DDS v5 series.
Okay.
Right? These are general purpose VMs. They can do a decent amount of, they can handle a decent amount of SQL Server workloads, small size databases, where you don't need to spend a lot on high IO intensive workloads.
But the general flat out recommendation is double sprinkles EBDS v5.
So Pam would love that I have double sprinkles on the slide. So I've got double sprinkles there. Now, and the recommendation is, when in doubt, pick that.
Okay.
Pick that as your first option. See how your SQL Server workload performs. Run your tests if you need to. And no doubt you will probably be very satisfied with the performance of that VM.
Okay.
Right? Again, it offers the best performance for SQL Server workloads at the best price. And that's what GigaOM benchmark provides in a lot of detail on how it provides that effective level of price performance.
Makes sense. So what we are saying is, to really recap of what you just mentioned, there are these tailor-made SQL virtual machine sizes like EBDS v5, and there are great storage improvements like with Premium SSD v2, and how Premium SSD v2 can really make EBDS v5 more performant,
Right.
and how they both can achieve that price performance.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Wow, this is great. So let's talk about how Azure also makes provisioning and maintaining SQL Server on virtual machines easy. If you go log into the Azure portal, and if you create a resource, and if you are going to create a virtual machine, you can create this virtual machine. But the thing that you can do is you can type in SQL virtual machines, and there will be a blade which is dedicated to SQL virtual machines, and you can create a SQL virtual machine directly from here. We will display SQL databases, managed instance, and SQL virtual machines, all the offerings that you would have typically from Azure SQL or Azure Data. And if you click on an image, we will display multiple images. By the way, SQL Server 2022 CTP is out there. You please go try it. And with the SQL virtual machines, and all you can do is you can pick an image and say create. The good thing about this is all the best practices that Microsoft always says, and all the best practices that you need to follow in Azure are completely kept in here by the vast experience of working with different customers. So I would not choose all this. I'm directly going to the best practices such that you can see what I'm talking about. If you go to SQL Server settings, there are multiple things out here, but I'll start with the storage configuration, right? There it is. If I click on change configuration, it will display me a storage configuration blade where you have type of the disk that you can select, and if you can select what all disks that you want, and you can by default you can say, hey, I want four disks of P30, and we will stripe it for you. How cool is that? It will say how many IOPS you are getting, and it will also say how much throughput you would get, and this is all striped for you. This is one brilliant thing. And look here, we say that please keep your system databases except MDB, of course, not on the C drive, but on the other drive. That can be provisioned directly from here. Your log drives are on separate drive. And guess what? Because you are doing this, again, we are doing this for price perf, right? We would make the host cache on for these data disks and host cache off for this log disk by default. You need not tell anything. We understand that these are data disks and we will keep the host cache on. These are log disks and we will keep the host cache off. And you will also see number of configure the stores. If this VM has a local drive, we will automatically select the use local SSD drive for the TempDB storage. We will give the path, the number of files, and initial size and auto growth. If you see, we have said number of files and initial size, which means we know that all the files of the TempDB should be of equal size, and has said number of files and the size. All the files will be of equal size. Let's talk about this in the management experience also. And of course, the log file is separate. So this is about the storage. And you have the same thing for instance settings also. You can change the collation directly when you're configuring your marketplace image. You can say, this is the collation that I want. This is the max stop I want my server for. These are the server limits, max memory limits that I would want. Even I can say, optimize ad hoc workload, lock pages in memory, instant file initialization. So by default, we will add NT service MS SQL Server into the lock pages in memory and perform volume maintenance tasks, local policies. If you want to change, please go ahead and change and keep your SQL service account out there. But by default, we would give this. And also one small gotcha here is, I'm not sure which SQL VM I took. Let's say 1283471. If you see, the current customer max server memory exceeds the selected VM memory, which essentially means we know what is the VM and what is the maximum size of it, and please don't configure the value outside of it. But also we will ensure that you will keep the max int size such that we can take the maximum server memory of whatever you are giving. So that's how the thought process went whenever we are kind of doing all the settings that a customer would want to do with the SQL Server. This is very well thought. We have a setup like experience, like what you would set up when you are setting up in the on-prem. Also, this is extremely embraced with all the Azure infrastructure. And now Also, here only you can say, if you have any software assurance, you can say, hey, I have software assurance. I will make sure that I will click on this. If you confirm this, there will be no bill, and you will have the Azure hybrid benefit you will get. Now, this is about the provisioning experience. If you see what we did here, we use the power of Azure, we use the power of SQL Server combined, and we have given you the provisioning experience, which will make you set the most best practiced SQL Server environment in Azure. Also, one quick thing before you go, this is all being enabled by SQL IaaS agent extension. SQL IaaS agent extension, as we are speaking previously, is a piece of software in the virtual machine which will enable you to get most of the management activities. Let me take few other things that you would like to see. This is one of the VMs that I have created. If you see this, this is the VM that I have created not from the marketplace image. I have installed, like most of the other, how the enterprise customers, how the other customers do. I have created my own image and got into Azure, and I have installed SQL Server IaaS agent extension. If I do that, what all I can do is, I can do almost what I will do with the marketplace images. I can manage most of the things. But the things that I love are the storage configuration. If you go to storage configuration, and if you click on tempdb configure, you would see you can configure most of the tempdb files. And if you see here, one file out of all these 4 files is of different size, which essentially then we automatically tell you that, hey, please go and correct that, such that each of the file will be on the same size, which is the best practice for SQL servers. And if you go and click yes, please configure, we will configure it for you. We will take the maximum size here and configure it immediately when you say yes. Also, there are few VM SKUs where you have local drive. In that local drive, if the VM restarts, you will lose all the data, which means you will lose the folder structure that you have created for tempdb. It is one of the biggest problems for most of the cloud DBAs, where you have to create an automated task to create that folders whenever SQL Server or the virtual machine restarts. So for that, what we did is, we will take care of that. All you need to do is come here, give what is the path that you want your tempdb folders to be created. We will create that, and we will make sure, even if you are moving from restarting the virtual machine, we will go create that tempdb folder structure such that your SQL Server never fails. Apart from that, there are the best other features like patching, backups, and SQL best practice assessment, which is which we just spoke, where you can enable, you can schedule, you can come and look at the best practices and tune your SQL Server for the high performance workloads. Again, this all proves why Azure is the best place to run your SQL Server workloads, and why we have tuned it for, and how we have tuned it for the best price perf out there. And let's also talk through a few best practices that Azure, like when we are in Azure, what we need to do, right? So again, no guesses. It's the same SQL Server that you are running in. It's the same SQL Server. It's no magic, right? But
customers have run this for like what, decades now?
Decades, yeah. For sure. But there are few small gotchas that people need to really make sure when they are configuring in Azure, which we all spoke about, right? One, the most important thing, make sure that you know your workload. What are the number of IOPS you have? What is the throughput that you are having right now? Choose the right VM. And as I said, we have enough guidance right now, which we are saying go to these three types of VMs which you rightly mentioned. That's the first step onto it. And they choose the right disk. Right VM, right disk. Yes, today we have Premium V1 as the offering that we have. Premium V2 is coming. It's in public preview. When it lands, it lands. But there could be few customers who really want to jump onto Azure and just start working on it on Premium V1. And for Premium V1, all those things that are mentioned on the slide really matters. Like you need to isolate your files, and data files go to host caching, log files goes to places where there is no host caching, and temp DB goes into the D drive, and make sure that you enable host caching. I can't say much enough especially when we are using Premium SSD V1, right?
Yes.
The reason is that's the exact reason why you have a larger D drive in EBDS V5.
Right.
The reason why you have larger D drive, larger throughput on EBDS V5 is to make sure that your host caching is helping for your data files throughput. And also for particular M series, there is something called write accelerator.
Yes.
And this write accelerator is very much useful for the log files.
Right.
And you can it's only for M series.
Right.
Not anything for any other series.
Correct.
And also please leverage the Azure Monitor, where you can all see how your network is going, how your disk throughput is going, all that stuff. And all the best practices that you would have for SQL Server. Make sure you have instant file installation on. Make sure you have optimized for ad hoc workloads on. Make sure you are configuring your max server memory in the right way. Like all the things. Make sure you have the efficient cost of threshold parallelism, efficient mag stop. You might need to make sure that all your current settings that you have, you generally practice in your on-prem. You need to have those with whatever it's SQL VM, Azure VM best practices, like what all we mentioned.
Right.
Here.
This is probably a shameless plug, but is there anything in the feature set for SQL VM that helps customers get some best practices assessment?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So we do. If you come to Azure, one of the best opportunity and one of the best manageability feature that everyone would get is SQL IaaS Agent Extension. Mm-hmm. I have spoken in enough platforms about SQL IaaS Agent Extension, and I would love to talk more. With SQL IaaS Agent Extension, which you would get by default if you're in Azure and if you're running SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, if you're running on full mode, there is a feature called SQL VM Best Practices Assessment. That's a very favorite feature of mine, because all you need to do is go enable it, and when you enable it, it will go through all the best practices in the virtual machine, and it will give you the report.
Right.
Now you can schedule it.
Right.
As in, on March 1st, these are my best practices. This is my baseline. On March 15th, I have one more baseline. Am I improving in my best practices? Right. Am I doing anything better? You can always assess your best practices.
Right.
And these best practices are coming from all the product team. Like we always do the test. We say, okay, we need host caching here. Are you having host caching switched on or not?
Right.
So those are the things that we always already embedded into that VM best practices analyzer, and it's there with SQL IaaS Agent Extension. And guess what? It's for free.
Right.
It's for the customers who wants to run SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. That's about it.
So this really means we've tried to embed these best practice guidance for our customers throughout the journey, from when they start provisioning, let's say using the Azure portal from a marketplace image. We guide them through how to configure this.
Right.
Then once they provision the VM, they can come use the IaaS Agent Extension or the SQL VM Blade in Azure portal to go and run best practice analyzer or assessment and get that baseline going.
Correct.
So along the way, we are standing together with them
Yes,
to guide them
right
through
beside
what
the
they need to
customer.
do.
Yes.
Right. And we're also looking at ways in which they can optimize costs
Yep.
by tuning down and up their storage performance
Yep.
with premium SSD V2s. They can cost optimize that way and change their settings as the workloads
Yeah.
move along.
And this is all coming from the feedback from the community, from the customers themselves. Like they are asking us, hey, we want this, and that we are
Right.
we are trying to deliver as much, such that we meet the price of what our customers demand.
Right.
And we have kept in few references where people can go check out
Sure.
what are the best practices as of now. And I'm excited to hear all the new improvements that you just mentioned about Premium SSD V2, and this really emphasizes the one word that we always say, that Azure is the best place to run your SQL servers. What do you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think from all that we've covered today, right from VM series to storage performance to best practices, I think there's no other place to run SQL Server other than running it on Azure. Especially if you have an IaaS workload, SQL Server and Azure VMs have all these goodness baked into them, and we are constantly thinking of it every single day as product team to enhance your experience as
Right.
customers.
Right.
So we really think that you found this session valuable.
Yeah.
And we hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.
Yeah, and thanks for attending the DPS Summit, and we will be here for the questions and try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.